All right, so glad to have with us today, via Zoom, Aaron Torres from Fox Sports and from his own show, the Aaron Torres Podcast. Aaron has written for Fox Sports, The Athletic, and he has also written an Amazon bestseller, One in Fun, about the 2010 Kentucky basketball team. Aaron, appreciate you joining the show, brother.
David, I appreciate you having me, man. We've talked a lot off air, and excited to talk a little football and basketball with you on air, my friend. How are you doing with your fancy background? And you got producers. I mean, you're big time, man.
No, not big time. Trying to get on your level, man. That's what we got to get the best on.
I'm so big time. I'm a jerk. I kept you waiting here for a little while. So I apologize about that. But I'll tell you what, man, it's crazy. I'm looking at, as we record here, it's August 29th. I don't know when this will air, but it's game week, man. I'm so excited to be joining you, David.
Dude, again, appreciate you taking the time, man. Can't think of anyone better to bring us into week one. With that being said, what was your reactions from week 0? What kind of stood out to you?
Well, I mean, 3 things. I'll go in kind of in reverse order. So I think, I don't know if other people do. I'm a UConn alum, so I was impressed with game 1 of the Jim Moore era. UConn starting quarterback goes down on the second drive. Late in the game, they had a chance to win it. At Utah State, by the way, 11-win team a year ago. Nick Saban, Utah State plays Alabama this week. Nick Saban said, this is a team that can win games in any conference. We're excited for the challenge that they're going to bring to Tuscaloosa this weekend. I'll also say this, David. I know that I might be in the minority. I was impressed by Florida State, 47-7 over Duquesne. And I think there's this narrative this time of year is when you beat a bad team by a lot of points, like that's what you're supposed to do. So you're not supposed to get credit for it. But I'm old enough to remember Michigan, Appalachian State. FCS teams win every year. Group of 5 teams beat Power 5 teams every year. And so I never discredit a team for winning big when they're supposed to win big. I thought Florida State looked really good. 3 running backs, going for over 100 yards. And obviously the interest will be what they can do against LSU this weekend at the Superdome. And then, of course, Nebraska. I mean, I'll say I don't think my takeaways are really all that much different than anybody else. Yep. I might be in the minority. I didn't have a huge problem with the onside kick with Scott Frost. The defense hadn't been great to that point. The run game had been great. They were up 28-17 at the time. I don't think when Scott Frost kicks that, orders that onside kick, that he anticipates that his offense, which has 28 points with 9 minutes to go in the third quarter, isn't going to score a single point the rest of the game. But it is what it is. And you can sit here and say what it is, what it isn't. What it is another close loss for Nebraska. Feel a little bit bad for Scott Frost, but at some point it stops being a coincidence and starts being a trend. And obviously he's got to start winning games that matter in a hurry. So obviously 3 completely different, angles that I took there, but those are the obvious big takeaways for me in week 1.
Yeah, absolutely. You're right. Everybody kind of took the onside kick and ran with it. Like on my segment I was talking about, I'm not a fan of that. Like I wouldn't have done that, even if you'd have converted it, even if they were recovered out of it, it's risky there. You have a lot of momentum. I was totally opposed with it. I know I've heard some people call it out, but I'm with you. At the end of the day, they didn't lose just off that one play. It was because their defensive line just got whipped up front.
You're a man that knows football, David. That was my, I say on my show all the time, 2 things that are divergent, they can be true at the same time.
Absolutely.
I don't think it was the right call. It's not the reason they lost the game. The reason they lost the game is because Northwestern averaged about 5 yards per carry and was blowing Nebraska off the line of scrimmage. And, you can argue and I do think there's something to, the momentum. They had the momentum and it was lost. How much more momentum could you have gained by actually recovering the onside kick? But I also think, from Scott, listen, what I said on my show on Monday was, I think from Scott Frost's perspective, I can see where he could say this. If we recover that onside kick, they can't stop us. We probably go up 35-17. Then they become one-dimensional and they have to start passing the ball nonstop. And so I get the headspace that he was in. I also get why in that exact situation, in his exact situation, year 5, at the time he's 15-29 overall, now 15-30 overall, why it isn't the right call. But I'm with you, David. I didn't think it was the worst thing. I don't think it was the worst decision that has ever been made in the history of college football. And, unfortunately for Scott Frost, I mean, really what's unfortunate for Scott Frost is that there's no other games, right? It was the really essentially a standalone game. I know like Western Kentucky was playing at that time, but it was essentially a standalone game. Everybody was watching it. Everybody reacted in real time to it. And so it's unfortunate, but that is what happens when you make a call like that. And then obviously we know how it all ended for Nebraska.
It seems like it's the same story, like you just mentioned, every year with Nebraska. But we're an SEC podcast, so I'm bringing on the man right here. Just give me your initial thoughts, big storylines you're liking, just initially surface level right here with the SEC this year.
Yeah, I mean, listen, the SEC is there's no conference with more storylines. I think there's a storyline literally for every team, including Vanderbilt, which obviously looked good on Saturday in week 0. Yeah, the biggest one to me, I know Alabama's kind of boring to talk about, right? Alabama fatigue, but it's not often that I can remember an Alabama team coming in where I do believe they are the best team in the country, but they also have real motivation off of last year. And I think it's easy to forget, not only the A&M loss, and not only the Georgia loss, they were up in the fourth quarter without their two best wide receivers against Georgia last year. And I think people forget that. I think you see the final score, you kind of just, it was Georgia's night, Georgia's year, national championship, congratulations to the Dogs. And it was. And it's not to take away from Georgia. Alabama could have won that game, especially obviously if Jamison Williams stays healthy and John Mechie, who we know is going through some personal stuff right now. Hope he recovers with everything. But he was out in the Cincinnati game. And then, of course, Jamison Williams is out in the national championship game. So Alabama having, and everybody's saying it, it's not as though this is a unique thought for me, but the best offensive player in college football, the best defensive player in college football, a coach that now has embraced the transfer portal with potentially 5 starters coming from the transfer portal this season. I think it's revenge tour season, and I think it's scary season for Alabama. I think it starts this weekend with Utah State. I think it continues in week 2 at Texas. And that, to me, I don't want to say it's the biggest story, but I think it's an obvious one. Georgia kind of speaks for itself. I think there's some teams that I'm intrigued by. Plus, I'm higher on some than others. I'm a little bit lower on Kentucky than most, probably as high on Tennessee as most people. I think Florida's interesting. LSU is interesting with first-year head coaches. So, I mean, we could talk about any team. I think every team has storylines, but I think Alabama with a chip on its shoulder to me is the most interesting. Didn't even mention Texas A&M. I would say Alabama, to me, Alabama with a chip on its shoulder is the most interesting. But again, then you get into Texas A&M, you get into LSU week 1 with Florida State, Florida hosting Utah. As I said, there's no shortage of storylines in the SEC East.
Yeah, I'm with you. I'm not as high on Kentucky as most are either. I still think they'll be good. I mean, it's a testament to Mark Stoops. If you're going 6-6, 7-5,
it's a football school. That's a down year. I don't know if you heard. It's no longer a basketball school. It's a football school. I don't know if you heard that from Mark.
Coach Cal told you that?
All I'll say is Mark Stoops can really never leave. I was thinking about this the other day, because as soon as Nebraska lost, I got a text of, do you think Mark Stoops would ever leave for Nebraska? And I was like, Mark Stoops kind of backed himself into a corner. You can't really leave for another job at this point. If Kentucky is a football school, like you said, it's a football school, you kind of sort of backed yourself into a corner there. So I didn't mean to cut you off, David, but that was something that struck me over the course of this weekend. But yeah, go ahead. But yeah, Kentucky football school, definitively. John Calipari's the worst human in the world. All that good stuff.
If you had to say week 1, what matchup involving SEC team would you say you were most intrigued with?
Probably Florida, Utah. And I think it's for a few reasons. So for people who know nothing about me, I do live in Pac-12/Big Ten country in Los Angeles, about 2 miles from the Rose Bowl. And I don't think Oregon's going to Atlanta and beating Georgia in Atlanta. But if Utah's a real college football playoff contender, like that's a game you have to win. Florida is, by any tangible measurement, probably the 6th or 7th best team in the SEC in a best case scenario. Maybe not a best case scenario, but you start going through teams. I mean, Alabama, Georgia, A&M. I mean, there's a lot of teams that you get to before you get to Florida. And so, I think that's the most intriguing game to me, because if Utah is a real college football playoff contender and they look great the last time we saw them in the Rose Bowl against Ohio State, that's a game you got to win. And then I also think from Florida's perspective, it's interesting because if you look at the schedule, by the end of September, they host Utah, they host the Kentucky team that we just talked about, and then they do play at Tennessee. And so I don't think Florida will be 1-3 after that Tennessee game, but it isn't inconceivable either. And so, that to me is the most interesting one for that exact reason, because I don't think Georgia's losing. I don't think Arkansas at home will lose. But to me, that's the one, because on the flip side, by the way, if Florida wins, oh my goodness, all the Billy Napier stuff that kind of came out 2-3 months ago with the recruiting, and I know it's died down, but it changes everything. But I think from Utah's perspective and from the Pac-12's perspective, and for whatever the future of the Pac-12 is, I mean, you go in SEC country on a Saturday night in the swamp and get a win. That's a statement win for you, your program, your entire conference potentially going forward. So that to me is the most interesting.
Yeah, and it's interesting, AT. It's from a standpoint of Florida, you feel like they have to get one of those first two games. I know we're getting a little week two, a little in the league as a whole. Florida gets Utah at home, and they get Kentucky at home. I feel like you have to win one of those games if you're Billy Napier. Like, it's not like it's over for you, whatever, but like, it would be tough to go 0-2, and then you're going to Knoxville 2 weeks later, like you said, staring at 1-3 right in the face.
No doubt. And, again, a couple things. One, I think that everybody knows this is a process and everything, right? But I always say, like, there's a difference between what's the right thing to say in August and what reality will be if it actually happens, right? Mm-hmm. And so, like, a team I look at, Texas A&M, I have some great friends, within the program, in the media down in College Station. And you ask anybody in College Station, I think they'll tell you publicly, Jimbo Fisher won't say it, but privately for sure, hey, we're building towards 2023. We got to figure out who our quarterback is. We got to get these young guys reps. And 2023 is the year that we believe we can compete with anybody. It's easy to say that in August. It'll be another thing if you're, and I don't have their schedule in front of me. I know they play Miami at home early, Arkansas and Dallas early, but it's easy to say that in August. It's another thing if you're 3-2 or 2-3 or 4-3 in the middle of October. And I do think there's an element of that with Florida as well. We know it's rebuilding. We know that it's a process. We know that Billy Napier hired literally every human being on planet Earth to be part of his support staff. Unemployment numbers went down thanks to Billy Napier, so not too soon. Listen, I mean, if you start 0-2, all of a sudden people are going to be saying, why do you need 84 support staff members? Like, these are conversations that happen in college football. It's why we love college football, but these are conversations that are going to be happening. So I agree with you 100%, whether it is Utah, whether it is Kentucky, whether it is both of them. I think you certainly need one of two. And you need momentum going into Knoxville and obviously the heart of SEC play with obviously LSU every single year. And then, of course, you play Texas A&M this year as well, Florida State at the end of the year, which, as we discussed, may be improved. You kind of got to get momentum going, and it starts early.
No, you're absolutely right. Yeah, A&M's an interesting team. Like you said, you talk to people close to the program just from working there. If the feel is 2023, like you said, they'll have a returning quarterback most likely. They'll have majority of that roster, give or take a few safeties like Damani Richardson would be back. And then, like you said, Bama loses a lot of their core guys. They get Bama at home that year in 2023. Like you said, the stars from hell, I mean, you were talking a year out right now, but they kind of align for A&M in 2023, but I don't think people will be happy with anything less than 9 wins this year to kind of springboard that.
Yeah, I don't disagree at all. And it's funny because the more you kind of look into the schedule, I mean, we know how good the SEC West is, but again, Florida at that time of year, have they figured things out? They obviously play A&M. Yep. South Carolina, there's a lot of buzz out of the East. Texas A&M plays them, and
South Carolina's due to win that game. At they've never beaten them. They're the cross division, the permanent division rival since they've been in the league. Since A&M's been in the league, South Carolina has never won that game.
That's interesting. I actually did not know that.
Yeah.
And so South Carolina, there's a lot of excitement about, and then it's worth noting, like, Miami returns a potential first-round quarterback, under center and Tyler Van Dyke. Connecticut kid, no big deal. Like myself, grew up in Glastonbury.
Good
Town's
player.
over, whatever, no big deal, no big deal. We don't have to talk about it, but it's okay.
Shout out Van Dyke.
Yeah, but so the path, and oh, by the way, lost to Arkansas last year, lost to Mississippi State at home. Now you got to go to Starkville. So they're just a fascinating team because it's interesting because David, I'll say this is that I do think there's the rare programs that, and for some reason, I'll just say this: are you a fan of? Can I ask you a question? Are you a fan of a specific team, or are you just a SEC guy, or who's your school?
So I went to school at Alabama. The only reason why I went to school at Alabama is because I was a diehard Alabama fan. My dad was a diehard Alabama fan. Grew up going to games. So I'm working in college football. The fandom kind of went away a little bit. I don't want to say fully, but I still support Alabama. I'm a big Alabama fan. Now, really, I've gotten into Alabama basketball recently. Wear my emotions on my sleeve more with them a little bit more than football, but they give me more reasons too, especially with the way the season ended last year. But to your point, Alabama fan growing up, that's where I went to school.
The only reason I ask, and maybe it's because I don't live in SEC country. I don't understand the hatred for Jimbo Fisher. I just don't. I really don't. And so, I bring it up because I don't even remember exactly where I was going with it. But what I was going to say about A&M was I think they're one of the rare programs where one of the things that makes the SEC and college football as a whole, just such an incredible sport to cover and follow and whatever, is the idea that I think most fan bases, their expectations are out of proportion, right?
Right.
I'll give you an example. Michigan was 10-1 going into Ohio State last year. And I can't tell you because I can't definitively say, but I think the vast majority of the fan base, if Harbaugh didn't beat Ohio State, really was ready for him to go and just to try to start something new. Fill in the blank, Brian Harsin, we know what's going on there. Anyway, the reason I bring it up is because I think Texas A&M is one of the rare instances where I think the national outside perspective is a little different than the internal College Station perspective, where I really do think any loss that isn't Alabama this year on the road, people are going to say, oh, Jimbo Fisher's overrated and whatever, NIL and blah, blah. And I think most A&M fans are like, no, as you said, David, we're building towards 2023. Things break. We get Alabama at home. Hopefully a second-year quarterback. At the very least, we'll know who the guy is. Whether it's Haynes King, whether it's one of the other two, we'll know who the guy is. Some of those younger defensive linemen will have a year in college football.
Year older, yeah.
Yeah, so I just find them interesting because I think the external perspective is a lot different than the internal perspective, and there aren't very many teams in college football quite like that.
100% agree on that, brother. If I had to tell you, all right, if I told you going in, Alabama or Georgia do not win the SEC, who are you going with?
I don't feel great about anybody outside of those two winning the SEC. My first inclination would be Tennessee, but that would probably mean them having to either beat Alabama twice or beat Georgia and Alabama in the same year, and I don't see that happening.
Then beat LSU and Baton Rouge.
It'd have to beat LSU and Baton Rouge. Maybe A&M, but their quarterback has literally thrown like 30 passes in his career. I think it's hard. I really do. And, I think it's hard, and especially because Alabama returns so much. There are years where there's a strong argument for somebody else, and you're always going to default to Alabama. But in a year where LSU has a new head coach, Florida has a new head coach, we just discussed Texas A&M. Auburn, obviously, Brian Harsin's coaching for his job. I think that program has limited upside this specific season. I could throw something against the wall. I think it's really hard to make an argument for anything other than those.
I caught one of your telling comments there. Harsin's coaching for his job. Coaches that are not at their current school after this year, who do you think it is in the league? You mentioned Harsin. Anybody else you would say that would be an interesting? And before I let you answer, I was going to say before the contract extension at SEC Media Days, Mike Leach was a little bit of an under-the-radar candidate, maybe even leaving on his own accord to go somewhere else. Just because you look at statistics, if he loses to Ole Miss this year, which I don't think they do, I think they get that at the end of the year. If he loses to Ole Miss this year, I saw some stat, it was some crazy stat, like a Mississippi State head coach does not survive. I don't think a coach has ever survived or maybe won after starting off 0-3 against Ole Miss. But I thought he was a sleeper, but he did just sign that deal for the SEC Media Day, so that kind of changed my opinion a little bit on that.
Well, I mean, the stat I like to throw around about Mike Leach, he's been in the SEC for 2 years. Wins at LSU, at Texas A&M, and at Auburn. So, I mean, I would hope Mississippi State fans would have enough perspective. I can't say that they would. You might know better than me. I have no idea if they would have any desire to bring Dan Mullen back now that he's available. I don't have any like sourcing that says that like Mississippi State. Now, again, it's college football. You start 2-3. Dan Mullen's sitting in that ESPN studio. All of a sudden, he looks freaking incredible. So, no, listen, I'll say this. A couple things. One, nobody stands out. But this is the SEC. I mean, if we were doing this interview on August 29th, 2021, and I said Dan Mullen will not be back next year, you would have laughed in my face and justifiably.
Yeah, would have been a crazy thought.
Yeah, so stuff always happens, and as I always say, somebody's got to lose these games, right? And like that's what stands out to me about realignment is everyone's like, well, now you had Oklahoma to Texas. Think about all these big games, and it's like, well, I mean, if Texas is playing Florida in week 9 and both teams are 4-5 or 4-4, and all of a sudden it's not a big game, So nothing really stands out to me. I think it would take something cataclysmic. Like even the funny thing is, like even the coaches that aren't coaching well are recruiting well, like Eli Drinkwitz at Missouri, like they had a top 15 class last year. So maybe there's a scenario where Lane Kiffin overachieves again and he looks for another job, but I don't think that really happens.
Yeah.
But outside of Brian Harsin, I don't really see it. But I also know this is the SEC and crazy stuff happens, and it only takes 1, 2, 3 game losing streak for everybody to turn on you.
No, you're 100%. Drinkowitz was the next one I was going to bring up. Like you said, though, the guys recruited Missouri and the city of St. Louis so well. It's like you said, unless it just goes totally off the rails and that you see them maybe win 3 games or something, and they're just like, we're cutting ties. I'm like, he'll most likely get another year, but crazier things has happened. No, I was just seeing what your take was on that. All right, upset of the year in the conference. What are you going with? Any games you see on the radar that you just are like, I'm calling my shot?
I don't, what I would say is this. I don't see any like super obvious upset. I'm a little higher on Mississippi State than most people. I think their win total 6.5. A lot of guys back on defense, 30-year starter at quarterback. So is it a win over Ole Miss? Is it a win over A&M for a second straight year? And the one thing that stands out to me, just being somebody that loves this sport, Georgia's going to be favored, I think, by at least 2 touchdowns in every game they play this year. Maybe Tennessee, whatever. Tennessee's at home, though. I don't think they finished the regular season undefeated. So the question becomes, is it South Carolina? Is it Tennessee at home? Is it at Kentucky late in the year? They play Mississippi State.
Yeah.
I don't know where that upset comes, but, I mean, you lose 15 NFL draft picks. And I know we do this thing where it's like, they recruit so well, they just reload. And it's like, yeah, but Alabama still loses a game here or there. Ohio State still loses a game here or there. Clemson has taken weird losses in the ACC. So when I look at Georgia, and I've grown to respect Kirby Smart a lot, that's what stands out to me is like the possibility, like they're going to lose a game somewhere. That was why I don't have them in the playoff, because I think they're going to go to Atlanta with 1 loss, and I don't think they're beating Alabama. But I'd be lying if I said I was smart enough to feel confident that there's one specific team on the schedule that's absolutely going to have their number on that specific Saturday.
Yeah, you're right. Like, as great as Nick Saban is, as you know, he's had, 2 undefeated seasons in his entire career. Even his national championship at LSU had a loss. Like, Bama in 2009, my sophomore year there, and then 2020 they went undefeated. That's, like you said, as great as they've been, they've lost games every year. Georgia might just, I don't know if they have the schedule too. I'm trying to think who would beat them, but you name some of them. At South Carolina, I just think it's so early in the year that they'll be ready for that. Oregon, they're not. I think it'll be maybe a little closer than people think. Don't think they get the job done. Tennessee in Athens, I don't think that's one. Florida, I don't think's ready for that yet. But like you said, it would just they get in a little lull, get in the middle, three quarters through the season, and they drop one. You're right. It's not completely out of the realm. All right, who are we talking about? I'm giving you three options. Who are we talking about more in 2024? We're fast forwarding. It is August 29th, 2024. Aaron Torres, Dave Shoemate. Who are we talking about more in 2024, good or bad? Brian Kelly, Billy Napier, or Jimbo Fisher?
I'll tell you, I'm going to go. I don't know if this is a surprising answer. I'm going to go Brian Kelly. And I'm a pseudo Brian Kelly defender. So I'm going to show my age a little bit. But I told you, I think earlier in the interview, I went to UConn.
Yeah.
I was at UConn when the transition from Mark D'Antonio to Brian Kelly happened at Cincinnati a million years ago. Who cares? Ancient history. Big East football doesn't even exist anymore. But like the flip of the switch from really good program under D'Antonio to like, oh, this team is crazy good under Brian Kelly. And I've always had a respect for him since then. But what I will say is a couple things stand out to me about Brian Kelly. You know, one, the Vegas over-under win total for LSU is like 6.5 games this year.
Yeah.
So even if they hit the over, it's probably going to be 7-5. And we know 7-5 is not acceptable at LSU. And I'm not someone that does the whole, like, the cultural fit isn't right. Like, that's not like, we've all heard the Urban Meyer, Nick Saban, whatever. I think it's interesting. They're losing a lot of players out of Louisiana, though. They lost a few in the last class. Okay, that's excusable. They've already been recruited by other schools. You get there in late December, whatever. They're recruiting okay in 2023, but, a couple of the best players in Louisiana have committed to Texas. They've committed to other places and committed to Alabama, I think. I don't have the 2023 rankings in front of me, but if you can't recruit Louisiana, I mean, that's one thing. Like, it's funny. Like, I was watching something on Ed Orgeron on Sunday night here about, 24 hours before you're recording. Say what you want about him. I mean, he left. I mean, I know players transfer, whatever, but he left the cupboard full. And there wasn't a player in Louisiana that he wanted in general that he did not get. And so far, and it's early, Brian Kelly has not gotten those guys. I know the safety is committed to Texas and whatever. The point I'm trying to make, Arch Manning obviously is committed to Texas, but whatever. The point I'm trying to make is that, the backbone of any great LSU team is Louisiana players. And you can have a Joe Burrow from out of state. You can have a fill in the blank from out of state, but it's the backbone is those players from Louisiana. And right now, it doesn't feel like in 2023 he's closing on them. So if you're talking about a 7-5-ish type season this year, and I think the schedule provides potentially for that, and then you're not talking about a super elite recruiting class where you close on everybody, then all of a sudden you're going into 2023 with question marks. And then by 2024, who the heck knows? So obviously the contract sets him up where he's probably going to get a little bit more wiggle room, especially because he's Scott Woodward's guy. But I think there's the scenario where we could be very much talking about him, LSU, going into that 2024 season of like, Brian Kelly needs to go 10-2. Like Brian Kelly needs to win some games because he has not had a great, 48 months of PR since he got to LSU way back in December of 2021.
No, I agree with you, Aaron. I think Brian Kelly, I think he has to win that Florida State. I think that would be a bad loss in your backyard first week. I feel like that's a must win for them. I have them at 8 wins, which I think is a number they also need to get to. Like you going back, circling the wagons back to recruiting. I think that would give them a springboard to finish that 2023 class and going into the 24 class. If they could have an 8-win season this year, beat Tennessee. I mean, we're talking about Alabama, like potentially earlier a little bit. Who could beat them? Depending on how LSU's going, they do go on the road to Tiger Stadium. Alabama usually doesn't struggle there. But if LSU is better than people think, that will be a hostile game and could be a tough game. But like you said, I think 8 is the number LSU needs to get. And I think he has to win on Sunday. Obviously, his job's not at risk. It would just be a bad start to lose that game.
And their schedule breaks in such a way that they get A&M and Florida at home in the same year. That was the same in the national championship year in 2019. It's obviously, whatever. But I bring it up because, you look at a lot of those swing games. I take that back. I mixed that up. So last year they had A&M and Florida at home. But a lot of the swing games this year are either at home or in, New Orleans, as you referenced, right? Florida State in New Orleans, but then also Mississippi State. Like, we know historically that's a game that the LSU football coach has to win. Tennessee, they're improved, but that's a game that LSU has to win. Ole Miss, that is a game that the LSU football coach has to win. Obviously, I understand you're not probably beating Alabama this year, and if you are, by the way, you get a pass for a little bit of time here. But taking out the LSU game, those are the games like Ole Miss, Mississippi State. Those are the games that you have to win as the LSU head football coach, and they're at home. And I think those are the ones that are going to be most interesting to me.
100%. No, I agree on every one of those points. Switching gears a little bit. I know you're a basketball guy. You're my big basketball guy. I don't go after Jim Bayless or your guy, JJ Redick. I know you and him are tight.
Okay, he blocked me. It's no big deal.
General thoughts on the SEC this year in basketball. Switching gears, we're going to basketball. I personally like 1 through 5 in the league. And when I say 1 through 5, you'll know what I'm talking about. But for the audience, you got Kentucky, Auburn, Arkansas, Alabama, Tennessee, and with A&M being there, that 16. What is your just overall thoughts going into the 2022-2023 basketball season for the SEC, and where they rank, you think, compared to the rest of the country, and how many teams you think they get in the tournament this year?
Yeah, I'm an old man, and I remember making this argument back, as crazy as it sounds, when Mike Slive was the commissioner of the SEC, when he really put a focus when the SEC network launched on, hey, we gotta like ramp up this basketball thing. And I think we're finally now seeing the fruition of it. The teams that you mentioned, I really do like. I know I mentioned A&M football earlier, but I know the basketball team, Buzz Williams doesn't do a lot of media, but I know behind the scenes they feel really good about the group that they have. I think it's 4 starters back off that team that was the NIT runner-up, that was the SEC tournament runner-up, that beat Arkansas, and I can't remember everybody. They beat Auburn, too.
Auburn, yeah, in the quarters.
Yeah, I know they like their group. And, from everybody else, I'll say, and I know you and I were talking a little bit off air, David, is that the summer tours, you don't want to take too much from them, but I thought Kentucky looked really good. A veteran group, which obviously we know the cliche, that's not really a Calipari thing, but Jacob Toppin, 3rd year in the program, Oscar Tshiebwe, 2.5 years. He redshirted, 2020, 2021, obviously National Player of the Year, whatever. Severe Wheeler, 2nd year in the program. CJ Frederick, 2nd year in the program. So I bring it up to say, I actually do like the team, and I know we criticize Calipari for everything. I think they're going to be awesome. Arkansas, it goes without saying. It's going to be a process. Saw Coach Musselman on the road in recruiting earlier this summer, and I think he's realistic about, we have a young group, but I think he likes his group going forward. And I saw Bruce Pearl too, and I think he likes his group going forward. The team that I'm most intrigued by, I'll tell you, is your Crimson Tide. I'm actually intrigued by like 7 teams in the SEC, but your Crimson Tide, weird year last year, just never really felt like it clicked after December. I mean, they were great in December. Gonzaga, Houston wins, but Namari Burnett getting healthy, a couple guys in the portal, a couple of the freshmen. I know Brandon Miller had a great summer overseas in their summer tour. So I'm really intrigued by them. Tennessee returns a lot. I'm with you. I think that top 6, in whatever order you want to put them in, I'm not going to have a huge argument against any of them in any order. And there does feel like there's a lot of Florida buzz with Todd Golden. I'm not sure that I totally see it. This is a really good league, man. Think about it like this. I think South Carolina is probably going to finish in last place. They might have a top 10 pick with Gigi Jackson, who just reclassified. So that kind of tells you everything that you need to know about this league. It's fun. It's competitive. I think they've embraced the portal and getting older and finding guys that fit. I think it's going to be a really good league this year. And I'll tell you, I think some of the coaching changes too. Dennis Gates at Missouri, I think, is going to be good. Chris Jans at Mississippi State is going to be good. Todd Golden, I mentioned, Matt McMahon, et cetera. So it's going to be a really good league this year. And again, I know that the world is still adjusting to the SEC being a basketball conference, but it's a basketball conference, and there's some really good teams in that league.
So, AT, what are you seeing? You feeling about 6 to 7, 7 to 8 teams you think getting bids come next March?
Yeah, I'd have to look at the out-of-conference schedule. I think the teams that you mentioned, I think for sure, I feel really good about Kentucky, Tennessee, Arkansas, Alabama, Auburn, Texas A&M. For people watching on YouTube or video, if you post the video, that's 6. I do like Florida.
I saw somebody the other day, I think you commented on it. Somebody I saw had Florida like preseason top 12 or 15. I like the Castleton kid back, and they got a couple of transfers, but I thought that was a little high.
In their preseason ranking.
We live in this, I think me being in the media as long as I have, and it's funny, I can remember talking to coaches and people in sports is like, I think we now live in this world where everybody wants to be the first on something, to say I was the first on something. By the way, I'm guilty of it too, right? I have Oklahoma making the college football playoff title game. It would obviously be the first win in the college football playoff era for Oklahoma post Lincoln Riley. If they make the college football playoff championship game, have no doubt, you will never hear the end of it from your boy Torres. Okay, like let's get that straight. So we all live in this world where we want to be right and we want to be the first on something. And I think that's what's going on a little bit with Florida. Is Todd Golden's a young guy. I'm just going to be blunt. I think he's pretty accessible to the media, so everybody feels like they have a relationship with him. And he's forthright about the analytics stuff. And I am not a huge. I'm a believer that analytics are a part of the equation. They're not the entire equation. I don't know how long you've been following my work, David, but about once a year, Ken Pomeroy tries to tell me how dumb I am because I'm the old school media guy that doesn't believe in analytics, and he tries to tear me down. And you know what? Like the old song, I'm still standing, baby. It's like, what is it? Tom Petty, I won't back down, baby. I'm not gonna back down on the analytics thing, And it was funny. I was talking to one of my writers that's a college basketball guy, and I said to him, I know everyone's excited about Todd Golden at Florida. I'm going to give you a quick trivia question. He was at San Francisco. We all know that first NCAA tournament of the 21st century.
Yeah.
David, how many times did he beat Gonzaga?
0.
Yeah, the answer is 0. You know why? Because when you have much better players, the analytics don't effing matter. Yeah. And so, and by the way, you think Nate Oates doesn't have access to analytics? You think Bruce Pearl doesn't have access to analytics? You think Rick Barnes, Eric Musselman, John Calipari don't have? So it's like, I get where somebody could look at them and say they're intriguing. What I would say is, what I always say is this, is that like I said, analytics are a part of the puzzle. They're not the only puzzle. They're not the only piece of the puzzle. But analytics don't really matter that much when you're down by 20 because the other team has significantly more talent than you. Okay,
no doubt.
Congratulations, you lost by 17 instead of 23. Congratulations. I'm sure the fan base is going to be thrilled with that. So I think they're probably an NCAA tournament team at Florida. I don't think it's a lock. So we said 6. I think Florida probably gets in. LSU will just be interesting if anything comes of the Will Wade investigation, if they're even eligible. I think they're right on the cusp with Matt McMahon. I think he brought some nice
Murray State kids, right? Yeah.
And I will say, I think Mississippi State has some interesting pieces, some older guys that were in that program, some transfers. They'll be interesting. But I think the 6 that we mentioned for sure, I think Florida's 7. And then the question becomes, who's number 8?
Well, I appreciate you getting on with us, man. I know our listeners for everybody out there, the Aaron Torres podcast, I listen to it all the time. Aaron, what are we doing? During the season now, you 2 or 3 times a week?
Well, I'm 3 times a week. I'm 3 times a week. And, for people who don't follow me, at Aaron_Torres, there may be some announcements about some more stuff. Sorry, I just checked my DMs. I've been in a little bit of a situation with my company, and I just got a victory. I'm like Nick Saban. I like to win, baby. So no, so three times a week. If you enjoyed this interview, I would appreciate anybody. No different than just whatever. You find me on social media, all that stuff, and then also on top of that, three times a week, maybe expanding during the fall of 2022. Can't believe week one is here. Some big announcements. Really excited. And no, man, I appreciate you having me. So I really do.
No problem, man. Well, we had a great segment here, great interview. We went over the SEC week one, talked a little foreign tour, a little preseason SEC basketball, got the college basketball experts, 2 cents on that. But again, AT, man, we appreciate you. Look forward to having you on as the season gets later. Then obviously when basketball season starts, we'll bring you on as much as you're willing to come on, man. But appreciate you, brother.
No, I appreciate you having me, David. You and I have been trying to do this for a while, so I appreciate your flexibility. Your producer's working hard behind the scenes, so I appreciate her flexibility as well. Thank you for having me, man. Anytime you need me, just holler, okay?
Appreciate you, Bob.
Keep following us on Mock 10 Sports for the best information on SEC sports.